Okay guys, this is going to be a quick tutorial on the Create T3 framework. It's essentially a quick way to get started with a scaffold for Next, TypeScript, tRPC, Prisma, but we're not going to be covering databases right now. Tailwind and nextauth. Maybe auth later on, but let's get you guys started. So you can use npm. I prefer to use pnpm. It's just faster. Let me show you. So let's create a folder. Demo. So to install pnpm, just do npm install -g pnpm and run that. You might have to do sudo to get permission to do that. Once you've got that installed, just use it as you would npm. Small differences here and there, but let me show you. So create T3 app latest, exactly as they have it there. We run that. It's going to download the latest template and ask us some questions. So project will be called demo1, and you can't really choose TypeScript. That's just a joke, right? It automatically chooses TypeScript. Nextauth, we'll have that. Skip Prisma for now. Tailwind, tRPC. Yes. So this one is just so that you have aliases when you import components. So it's from the root instead of relative to where the file is where you import from. So that creates a new folder called demo1. And we've got like package.json, readme, node modules, source, all that stuff. To run it, just do pnpm dev, as I tell you there. And that will start the server on port 3000. So let's go localhost 3000. And this is the starter site, like a sign in. By default, it's Discord, but let me show you guys how to get started with this thing. So I'm going to open up a code editor and let's hide this stuff, right? So let's see if we can make some space here. Okay, so starting off, source pages index. So this is very much like the old PHP days. Your routes in the pages folder translate to your URLs, like folders and so on. I'm going to show you now. This HTML here is what we see in here. So if we search for the create T3 app, the title up there, let's just change it to hello world. And it updates in real time. So as soon as you hit Control S to save, it's gonna update the browser for you. So let's just get rid of like a whole bunch of stuff in here because we don't need it. So that's a blank page, and gonna get rid of this auth demo component, right? So we've got a nice blank one. So let's just start off and build some basic stuff. So let's do a div, and with Tailwind everything is in class names. So you've got like padding for P10 would for instance be all around a padding of 10 units, and you can have autocomplete if you install the extension for Tailwind. This Tailwind CSS, just install that. And you've got like BG with a bunch of colors. So if you've got like red, let's do a indigo 500. And let's add a button in here. Let's do it like next. So we've got a next button, and let's add some padding and margin, and let's make it rounded. Nice Cool. Text, white. For more information on all these keywords, just go to tailwindcss.com, I believe. Docs. And on the side, you'll have all of these things: floats, box sizing, grids, flicks, padding, margin, width, fonts, backgrounds, borders, and yeah, it's very nicely documented. So you can do like rounded full to get like a full circle, which is very useful. Yeah. Now let's do basic state if you don't know React. So I'm gonna have a next and previous, and we're gonna have like a page number. So we'll do the API calls after this. Let me just show you how this works. So useState is kind of like a getter and setter. So first you get the getter, which will be our page number, and then page number set equals useState, and we initialize it with a 0. You can also define your types in here, so it would be like a number or perhaps a string, right? If you wanted to do that kind of thing, you can. Otherwise, it will just infer it from what you defaulted to. Cool. So to display that, curly braces and then your variable. And we should have a previous and a 0. Let's style our button. So I'm going to select the button, press Ctrl D to select both, press right arrow, class name equals, let's do a BG yellow 500, and a padding of 4, margin of 4, also rounded. Cool. And let's do hover state. So hover, and then you can do any property. Let's do orange 500. So on hover, we've now got a nice effect. Now the onClick events, you can do like onClick, and we'll use the setter, page number set, and we'll use page number -1. Just copy this onto the other button as well. +1. Cool. So now we've got a basic page counter. Now the next thing I want to show you is how do we move this into its own separate component, right? So maybe we wanted to have multiple of these that are all with their own state, right? So let's go in source. Now it's best to, and convention, to just make like a components folder here and a new file, and let's call that page component tsx export. And you can either do like a default function export, just give it a name, and you'll like return any HTML from here, right? And let's copy what we're gonna have in there. I'm gonna cut it actually. And let's move these buttons there, and I'm gonna press Control dot and then just import that useState, do a save. The save, by the way, I use prettier. This code formatter, install it, and then do like a right-click, format document with, and then configure default formatter, select prettier. And in your settings, you can set it to format on save, or otherwise just do like Control-Shift-I or format document, right? Makes it nice and neat. Cool, so we've got a component and we can now pop in, like, let's do 3, control dot, and that will import from that root. And we don't need all of these anymore, so remove. Cool, there we go. Obviously our BG Indigo is in here, and then we've got all of these counters as subcomponents. So now you can use them independently. Cool. Then, how do you pass in data from, let's go in here, and say we wanted to create another subcomponent and pass this page number into that component, right? So the most basic way to do that is say, let's do a table export function table. I'm not going to do this one as a default so you can see. And imagine we've got like some table in here. Let's call this table component actually. So below the next and previous, I want the table component, and it's red because you can't return 2 elements unless you either wrap them in like a div or some other element, or if you really don't want to nest them in the final code, you can wrap them in empty tags like that. Okay. Cool, so we've got this table component. Now I want to be able to pass in like page number there, something like that. Right, so this doesn't exist on it yet. Let's F12 in here, and we're going to say we're going to expect some properties, page number, and that should be a number, right? Table goes here, and we are on page props dot page number. Cool. So let's do a save there, and you can see now it's showing we are on page 3, and we go next and previous. Pretty simple, right? Let's just style this one actually, so it's a bit more clear that it's separate elements. Last name, BG, white, and you can do a slash on any of the colors to do a transparency, something like that, with a margin 10. Let's do around it as well. Whatever, like that. Cool. So nice and clean, separate components. The next thing I want to show you is tRPC and how we do API calls to the backend, right? So in this first demo page that you get, they've got this example query. So I'm just gonna like uncomment this one again, and we deleted the import. So that comes from utils API, which is this file here. Don't worry too much about it, but it comes from there. So I want to just print out what we're actually getting from that API call. So I've got this helper to just generate a pre-block with a JSON stringify so we can show you what data is in there. So we get like all of these properties on this, it's actually a React query element. So dot, and you get, was there an error? Is it fetched? Is it busy fetching? Is it loading? There's slight differences between them, depending on if it's the first time it's loading or and so on. But in general, just use like is loading for loading screen stuff. The actual data coming from the backend will be in this data, and that can be undefined because it might not be finished loading yet, right? So you have to just keep that in mind and handle that. So the backend is giving us this default greeting hello from tRPC. So the nice thing is, in the past it was like 2 separate code bases. Now it's one code base, and instead of typing in /API as a string, we've got this autocomplete. So on API dot, you can have all your routes that you define on your backend. And on any of these API calls, you can just press F12 and go to its definition. And this is how you handle backend calls. You define what you expect as an input. So we expect text as a string, and this is not TypeScript types because we need a validator to run at runtime, not at compile time, because often a lot of your data is user input or comes from other systems where you can't really trust that the data will always be in the same type, right? So we actually validate the data coming in, and if it's not the expected type, it will give them an error saying, we expected a string there. So it makes your validation on input a lot easier. The public procedure is just a shorthand way of saying that there's no security checks on this one, where the protected procedure will use the next auth session so that only logged in users can actually run this query, right? Yeah, so text input and then query. There's another thing in here called CTX, so that would hold your session information of what user. Let's see what's in here, user dot, and you've got email, image, all that stuff, right? Same on this one down here. And you can see this input is optional, so you can totally delete it, but then you won't have input and can't use that one, right? Yeah, so you can also make this an async call and do your fetches from here to other API servers or your SQL queries, Mongo database, anything that you want to do with data that might take a while, whatever processing that you have to do to send it to the app, right? Then this is real time, right? So the cool thing is you can be changing what you receive back from your backend API. Let's say foo will be bar, right? And then hello will be hello.data dot. You see now we immediately get this extra foo, right? So you get really predictable IntelliSense and error checking. Say I made a typo and I typed zoo, this thing is going to highlight, it's going to error when you build, it's going to tell you exactly where the problem is, right? Until you fix it in your backend. Yeah, and that works for nested stuff. Very, very cool. Then there's just this one more thing. So queries are GET requests where inputs from the front end. So here we actually send from tRPC to the server and it responds back, putting that text into the string that we get back in the greeting, right? So what if you wanted to do something where you first type into an input box and then onClick that sends it off to the server? So I'm going to quickly do that and then we're done, right? So let's do an input and value is going to be some getter setter. Let's make one here. So user input set equals useState, and we'll default it to nothing, empty string, and this is our user input. and on change, gonna get the event and user input set e.target.value, right? That is our user input, and we'll just need to style it so we can actually see that it is one. That should do it for now. So you can click in there, and the text is, just check here, text black. Yeah, there we go. Cool. This text white was just turning the text on the input white as well. Cool. Then we need a little button. That's fine for now. And we'll need another backend call. So let's jump to this example here. Let me show you how you can do your own routers. So this is like some fancy API that you're building, and then you can do create tRPC router to do like nested stuff, right? Some more layers, and you can nest these, right? So each time it will be another dot layer in. Let's do a public procedure here, dot input, and here we're going to use Zod, which you briefly saw up here. The Z is imported from Zod. You can check the documentation on it. It's pretty straightforward. So say just we're expecting an object, and on it will be some user input as a string. Just import the Zod. Cool. And this will be, you can do a query which will run on load, or a mutation, which is in the background a post request, right? And this will return a server result. Let's just do like foo for now, and maybe whatever the user added in there. Let's grab the input. And we can do like a console log receive data. Cool. Then on here. So on that button, when we want to send it, we're going to do onClick. And let's just define that call. So this is fancy API, is API dot, there's our some fancy with more layers, use mutation. Now you don't pass data in here, we're going to do that later on. So this is our handler, and on click we're actually going to do the mutate, and user input is the user input. You can also just, since it's the exact same spelling, you can just do it like that. And yeah, so when we click the send, it will send what we typed in it to the server. Let's just, yeah, it's running there. So I'm going to type in like hello server, and we click send. Let's check the server, see it, it says receive data. And if we check the log, there's where we send off the request to the server with our input, and here's the response from the server. The result is an array with 2 elements, so it was the server result is foo and then whatever we typed in, and it's actually the entire input, right? So that's input dot user input would have been just a string. And yeah, that's that's about it. If we wanted to display this on the screen, we can do, instead of showing this previous hello data, I'm just going to swap it in for the fancy API. So here we can see what the server result was, right? You can also get it here on success. Right, so data dot has the server result and this one should be foo. I don't know if it's going to be that good with it. No. Yeah, but that's how you do it, right? And that's just a quick primer on getting started with React and Create T3 app. Thanks a lot.